I'm Mike Graham, this is Talk TV, and this is Putin's War. The latest episode in what's happening in the Ukraine, how the government here in Britain is responding to it, and what's going on behind closed doors in Russia as well. I'm joined this week once more by Hugh Andree. Hugh, welcome back. Thank you very much. Good to see you again. Quite a lot of developments since we last spoke about this on this show, particularly with hardware, military hardware, supplying of tanks. Indeed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, when we last met was back in December.
Yeah.
And to be fair, as we said back then, not a lot really was going to happen on the ground. And I thought today perhaps we could touch on just three main components, which is the ground operations, the use of tanks, which segues in quite nicely, and also another Russian grouping that we keep hearing about, which is the Wagner group. So, sort of where ground operations are concerned, the focus has really been around Bakhmut in the Donetsk. And Bakhmut strategically is not actually very important, but it has been a thorn in Putin's side for some time now. It gives access to a couple of more strategically important cities in the Donetsk, but ultimately what's happening there now is Bakhmut has been levelled. It resembles. If viewers were looking at it now, it would think of a First World War film set. It's been flattened, and
so much of the country looks
many thousands of people have lost their lives. But from the Soviet perspective, they've been using this Wagner group to do a majority of the fighting in and around Bakhmut, but no gains have been made, and in Bakhmut itself, it really is trench warfare, literally, and gains have been measured in yards. That is it.
And in that kind of battle sphere, if you like, where you've got ruins of buildings and presumably hand-to-hand combat going on, I mean, it's hard to measure who owns what bit of land anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, it's they're fighting out of trenches. I've actually, when I witnessed trench warfare, albeit at a small scale, myself in Bosnia. When you were there, and they are literally, there will be points on the ground where they are only a few meters apart. Hence why I said gains are measured in yards. But it's a messy, dirty war of attrition. And really what's been happening is both sides have been regrouping over the winter. We touched on this before the break. Resupplying, repairing and maintaining their kit and equipment. And of course in Ukraine's home ground, they've been looking for tanks. And now we've finally seen, I thought it was only going to be a matter of time before other countries followed Britain. So Britain have obviously agreed to supply 14 Challenger 2s. Germany have agreed to deliver 14 Leopard 2s, and the M1 Abrahams, being 30 of them, have been delivered by the US. Now,
they seem quite small numbers.
They are. The Ukraine wanted 300.
It's quite a long way short of that.
It is, but if 6 NATO countries now each deliver 14 and the 30, they're up there, thereabouts, around 100. Now, tanks, talking about Bakhmut, talking about trench warfare, it's very much been defensive warfare throughout the winter, and that's really due to the meteorological sort of situation at -20, -30. They are all waiting for spring. President Zelensky is convinced that in the spring we will see a massive offensive by the Russian forces, which is probably why it ties in quite nicely with the delivery of all these tanks. And 100 tanks will make a difference. But they will have to be manned.
And will they all be in one place?
They will be deployed tactically. Tanks within the all-arms battle, tanks have to work as part of the overall either offensive or defensive strategy. However, tanks need to be defended and protected by infantry, artillery, and indeed air cover. And I don't think we're a million miles away from actually seeing some NATO air cover provided, not necessarily to be flown by Ukrainians, by NATO pilots, etc., or US pilots, but I just cannot see, I just see the way this is rolling out. Those tanks have to be supported by infantry. All of those tanks move at 25, 30 miles an hour, which is 40 kilometres an hour, across country.
They have to be operated as well by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, they have to be operated by very skilled crews, and there's a gunner, a loader operator, a driver, and a commander. So that's a crew of 4. That in itself, I always had many people asking the question, well, if you're going to deliver all these tanks, where are they going to come from? Well, we know the answer now, and I suspect other NATO countries will feel obliged almost to deliver some tanks. Their crews have to be trained. To train a tank commander, colleagues of mine who went to the Armoured Training Centre in Dorset, that's 16 plus weeks to train a commander. So you are looking about 16, 18 weeks, including a live firing phase as well. So they have to be trained, and then of course you've got the supply chain. All of those need ongoing maintenance and repair. The first module the tank crews will learn will be D&M, which is driving and maintenance. But I suspect the MOD has a plan. It will have a plan. I don't believe for one moment the Ukrainian tank crews will undergo the full training course that a British tank crew would go through. That will be scaled right back. They will be working from 8 in the morning till 8 at night with 45 minutes off for lunch, which will probably happen out on an area or on the ranges.
And what about the Russians' capabilities of damaging these tanks?
Well, the T-90, I mean, when it comes down to damaging them, all tanks now have what's called ERA, explosive reactive armour. The Russian ERA is really quite basic, and you can see it looks like boxes taped on all around the tanks. The ERA is effectively 2 sheets of metal with explosive in the middle, and when a warhead hits the outer sheet, it moves, it creates the explosion, and so the 2 sheets move over one another, so the warhead's always on new armour. Really, I think the real operational sort of gain here is that our tanks are much quicker. They're all fitted with night vision capability, and that is really important. That is key. They've got rifled barrels. The Challenger 2, it can fire sort of several rounds, one after another. It can acquire a target whilst it's already firing around onto another target. So they are really sophisticated, but as I say, they have to be backed up with artillery cover and with infantry support. So I suspect what we will also see, time will tell, but we will see British, NATO and US armoured personnel carriers also being delivered in order that those personnel carriers can move at speed with infantry inside to protect the tanks.
So it sounds like a bit of an escalation from NATO's perspective then.
Well, I think it is, for sure. It's definitely an escalation, and that's why I said I really wouldn't be surprised at some point if some form of air cover has to be provided as well. But that hasn't happened yet. I know that there are certain elements of the US military pressurising President Biden to make that step, but for obvious reasons they're being held off. But I reiterate, they won't be flown by US and/or NATO pilots.
Right, interesting. Hugh, thanks very much indeed. That's all we've got time for this week.
You're welcome.
Hugh Andree there with the latest on the deployment of tanks from the West into Ukraine for Ukraine's purposes. We'll have more next week on Putin's War. I'm Mike Graham.